Hey everyone, it's Zach here. Today I'm going to walk through a workflow using Dynatrace to integrate with Event-Driven Ansible, and also added a touch point with ServiceNow for incident management during this whole process. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just walking through the Ansible artifacts, showing what it looks like from the Dynatrace perspective and then the ServiceNow perspective. And what I'll do is I'll trigger a synthetic event to let the process run and just step through what's happening. So the first thing I want to talk about is our Ansible rulebook. So anytime you have event-driven Ansible, you're likely going to have at least two artifacts, right? You'll have a rulebook, which is going to process the event coming in, and then you'll have a playbook, which is typically the downstream action that will be taken to actually remediate the problem. For this example, my playbook's going to be very simple, and so is my synthetic event, right? I want to focus on the integration points rather than focusing on the, Dynatrace specific problem and then a very targeted remediation action. There may be more to come on that, but for this video, I'm really just focusing on the integration. So in the rulebook itself, you'll see I've got a source plugin using the Dynatrace source plugin, so maintained and developed by Dynatrace. And it's going to require me to put in my API host, so my Dynatrace instance, and then a token that I've generated, which has a scope required to talk to the problems API and pull information about events. So that is my source plugin, and that's going to interact with the problems API. If I scroll down here, I've got my rules. So in this particular case, like I said, very simple. I just have one rule, and I'm going to catch any events that are open. So if I pull a problem and it's closed, I'll go ahead and filter that out. And then my action is going to be to run a job template, which is in my Ansible controller instance called EDA Dynatrace Problems. And that job template, as we know, is going to be tied one-to-one with the playbook. So that playbook, if I go over here on the left, is going to be this resolve problem playbook. So this is the action that will be taken once EDA processes the event and sends it over. So you'll see here that there's a play that targets localhost. So in this first play, I'm actually going to take the event that I received from EDA, and I'm going to use the payload. So you see this Ansible EDA.event problem ID. I'm going to use that to pull down more information about the problem itself, which is in this step called get problem details. And the reason why I'm doing that is specifically what I'm looking for is the problem host affected. So once I get that host ID and I'm able to extract that from the payload that I get from the event, I then am going to once again hit the Dynatrace API and get information about the host itself. And I'm doing all of this to eventually get to the point where I actually have the affected instance so that I can then use Ansible to connect to that instance and run an automation playbook. So that's what these steps are doing here, and you'll see kind of towards the end, I've got this EC2 instances results, and I'm going to query for that public host name, and I'll set that to a fact here, and you scroll down, I'm going to create an incident. So this is that ServiceNow integration part of it. I'm actually going to take the information from EDA. I use a nice little comments with a code block to kind of render it nicely in the ServiceNow incident. With the problem details, I give it a general description, and then I keep going down here and I actually add the relevant instance to my in-memory inventory. And this is useful because I can now run a separate play to connect to that particular host or hosts. So if multiple hosts were affected, these are actually being put into a group, which I'll run against. And my demonstration is just going to be one host in that group. But what I can then do is run my remediate play against all hosts that were affected. And so to give an overview of what the remediate problem is doing for this particular, very simple example is I'm really just going to use gather facts to pull information about the hosts themselves. I'm going to create some attachments with the JSON information. So one JSON attachment with the event information and then one with the facts that I've gathered from the target instance. So I've got a couple steps here that are doing that. setting up those files. And what I'm going to do is I'm then going to close the ServiceNow incident, which I created in the initial play when I was responding to the event. And I'm going to add those attachments, and I'll just give some close notes, and we'll be able to see in ServiceNow kind of what that looks like. So again, this is a simple example, right? In theory, between these steps, right, we're going to actually be taking some sort of action, right? If it's a problematic process, we may have to kill that process, or we may have to send an email to the owner of that process to say, hey, something's going on here. Things like that, right? Maybe we need to restart the process if there's a memory leak and clear out the memory, and then notify someone to go and do a deeper investigation. But regardless, kind of eventually, once a remediation step is done, we'll want to close our incident. And then the last step as well is to go ahead and close the Dynatrace problem. This is actually specific to my custom event. If you're actually working with a real Dynatrace problem, which is monitoring some sort of metric, if you remediate the issue on the host itself, Dynatrace and Davis AI should actually detect that the problem was resolved, and it will be closed automatically. So that step may actually not be required in your process. So let's hop over into Dynatrace and just see kind of the different pieces that we've got here. So I've got my instance here that's being monitored by Dynatrace 1 agent with information about it. I'm going to use Postman to actually just create a synthetic event, which causes a problem, quote unquote, for this machine. And I'm going to use the host ID here, which is important within Dynatrace when I create my event, just to say that this is the impacted entity. When you have a realistic generated problem, the impacted entity will be associated with it in the same manner, so you'll still be able to pull that information and then connect to the host with Ansible. So kind of last thing I want to show is I've got my Dynatrace problems rulebook activation. I'm not going to go into the detail how these are set up, but it's the rulebook that I showed earlier. I'm going to go ahead and start it, and that way this rulebook activation will now start polling the problems API, and once I create that synthetic event, we'll get a fire count over here, which will trigger our Ansible playbook. So let me go ahead and pull up Postman. This is a simple payload, right, for that custom alert I was referring to. I'm just going to call it ED8 demo problem, and I'm using that host ID here to correlate it to the problem, the host that I just showed. So I'm going to send that, come back to our internet. Should be able to come here, and if I go to problems, it may take a few moments. Oh, it's already popped up here. You can see my EDA demo problem has showed up. If I come into EDA, we'll see that I've got a fire count here. And if I go to Ansible Automation Platform, you'll notice that this particular inventory has sync on launch. So the fact that we're using the AWS EC2 before the playbook runs, it's going to sync the inventory. That's very useful for, especially when you're dealing with dynamic IP addresses. If they're changing on the fly, you want to sync the inventory first. And then the playbook ran, right? So this is my playbook that I showed initially that has 2 plays, which is getting information, setting up the hosts, and then going ahead and doing the incident management as well as the Dynatrace problem. So let's go over to ServiceNow, and let's refresh our list of incidents. And what we should see here is we've got our EDA demo problem instance that I just created. If I click on it, we'll see that it was first created, and I then used some metadata to add a comment, right, and create what was impacted, so environment, what was the type of the event, custom alert, so would be more useful with a realistic event. And then I also put a link in here where I actually click on it and it'll take me to Dynatrace and show me the problem details. Scroll up, you'll see these are those 2 attachments I was talking about. The Ansible Facts one is actually pretty interesting, so if I click on here, and I can go ahead and open it up. So now you can see these are the Ansible facts I gathered about this machine. And this may actually be common or useful in a generic ticket that you're creating for a Dynatrace problem. You may also want additional information, but this could always be useful just to give you a snapshot of what the facts about that machine look like when the problem occurred. Let's go down here, and this app here is just an app on my local machine that I use to inspect JSON. If you scroll down, so really nice information here. I hope you enjoyed kind of that demo and the process there, again, I wasn't trying to focus on the specific alert itself. I just wanted to focus on the integration points. Like, how can you connect Dynatrace detecting a problem with Event-Driven Ansible, and then have Event-Driven Ansible run a playbook that actually connects to the impacted entity, and also does incident management in the process. So I hope you can use this as a template to build around some of the real Dynatrace problems you're seeing in your environment, and develop some automatic remediation that saves you time, right? And also creates that audit trail on ServiceNow. So as always, feel free to leave questions in the comments, or suggestions. I appreciate it. Thank you.